Change has been coming to Windham County winters. In November 2007, I talked to 4 Windham County farmers, and I asked them if global warming was affecting their operation. I also wanted to know how they were reducing their carbon footprint. Sugaring time can now happen in December or January. Reed Miller in DUMMERSTON has successfully tapped a sugar maple from fall through spring, leaving the tap in the tree half the year. And not only that, he has found a way to tap the same hole 2 years in a row. My first stop was the Dwight Miller and Sons orchards in DUMMERSTON. Dwight Miller Jr. gave me a historical perspective on the farm, and Reed Miller, his son, talked about an experiment.
Isaac Miller was a 4th generation immigrant in America from Scotland. I guess the religion drove them out of Scotland, and I think they went from Scotland to Holland, and then from Holland they immigrated from there to the United States in Massachusetts.
My name is Reed Miller, and this is Dwight Miller and Son Orchards. We've been farming here since the 1700s. About 10 years ago, I noticed that when a maple tree was tapped using new equipment, which has no yeast or bacteria that has accumulated, that through accident the tree would run for 2 years in a row. So what I set out to do was to prove it and to document how it worked. And what we did starting 3 years ago, we set this experiment up, tapping this particular tree in November of '05. And the experiment was to find out if we had tapped a tree. This is a micro spout, which was brand new, using tubing, which is brand new. If we tapped in the fall, how long would this hole run for before it dried up? So this one hole gave us 92 ounces of syrup the first year that we did this method. So what we did the second year is to see if, in fact, that hole would yield sap, hence syrup, the second year. And because it's something that had never been done before, I had Bill Gunther come, who was the county forester, and come up and watch me set the experiment up. And what we did was we used the same hole that we had garnered the sap production from the year before. We bored out using 2 larger size bits, ending up with the standard 7/16. So the first year we made 92 ounces. The second year from the rebored hole, we made 70 plus ounces of syrup. So one hole yielded sap 2 times. And what that again taught us was that if we don't introduce the yeast and bacteria into the tap hole at the time of traditional sugaring, there's no reason for the hole to shut down and therefore give us problems with production when the weather's funky. So the thing that I'd like to bring out was when we did the experiment the first time, we had 2 periods. Realized that we set this up in November. We had 2 periods that were over 20 days of a long, hard freeze. At the end of that freeze, in January and December, when the weather warmed up both times, the sap ran freely. So we were able, this particular experiment I think was set up for over 100 and some odd days. And at the end of that period of time, it still ran freely. So we've learned that it's very similar to the difference between our traditional tapping methods is if we cut our skin, which is what the bark is to the tree, it will heal up and make a scab and a scar very shortly in a couple of days. At the same time, we can give ourselves an intravenous or an IV through the skin, and we're not allowing the infection to come into the skin to create the healing process. If sugar makers do this, and it applies more to sugar makers that are below 1,000 feet in elevation, and the reason for that is that here, this experiment took place at about 500 to 600 feet, and we can have a lot of weather at any time during the year. We can have sugar season in January, February, March. So someone who's at elevation is going to have their season be more in the traditional sugar time, which would be in into March and April. We can make syrup here in February, March, and April, but we're never quite sure. So we don't have to know what the weather is going to be as long as we set things up so that our equipment is operating room conditions clean, sanitary, not really clean, not pretty darn clean, not kinda, but sterile. Then we don't have to worry about what the weather's going to do, because we will harvest whatever's going to come by if we've done this. And this is something that we've done and replicated several times now. Last year, this being 07, the spring of the sugar season of 07, I didn't have anything else to do, so I set the experiment up a little differently. I used exactly the same formula, but I started to tap the day before the sap ran, which is in the middle of March, and we had a very late season this year. What I learned was that we again made about 90 ounces of syrup this year in the traditional sugar season from the middle of March to about the end of the second week of April. And so the two experiments that we did, which were 2 years prior, which was going from November through March, we made 90 ounces of syrup. Using a traditional sugar season, which would be the month of March and into April, we made almost exactly the same amount. And it came more concentrated at a different time. So what we've learned is that this particular tree, anyway, is going to give us about the same amount of syrup from start to finish. But if we set up our work correctly, it doesn't make any difference when we do it. So the cost of this over a traditional tapping method is about $1 a hole. So if a farmer were to spend, in terms of capital expense, an extra $1 per tap, then the yield should be, or at least what we've demonstrated here, is the yield should be the same regardless of whether it's done from fall to spring or just in the spring sugar months. And what this does is it allows us to not have to worry about when the sugar season is going to happen. We don't have to guess the weather. And this is a farm that is one of the oldest continually operated sugar bushes in the state of Vermont. So our history dictates that we would like to have normal. I should point out too that this particular tree is what I would refer to as a super tree. I mean, I've known this tree all of my life, and this tree does things that other trees don't normally do. And I'm guessing it's probably 150 years old-ish. And so the history that we have here, the information that we've garnered over the generations, as well as doing things like this, you know, we've learned from past history, but it's also incumbent upon us to be able to make a living today, because my generation, my children's generation is here, and they have an interest in what we do, and I would like them to have the opportunities that I do. And it's very difficult when the weather doesn't, it isn't as normal as it used to be. I mean, we've always had extremes, but now the extremes, they're too different to know and understand and predict. And the financial risk is every bit as great as it ever was. And diversity is one of the ways that we help protect ourselves from Mother Nature. So it's not a restful occupation necessarily. And you know, if we have a problem in front of us here, my wife and I, if you give us 2 weeks, we'll find a solution. So partly it's attitude too. And the attitude is, we may have taken a hit on the chin, but if we have the right attitude and use our resources correctly, that we'll find some other way to do it.
I'm Paul Harlow from Westminster, Vermont. I'm the third generation farmer on the farm that my grandfather bought in 1917. I've been farming here all my life, obviously. Started with my father when I was in grade school. We had a lot of dairy cows, and we've progressed to mostly organic vegetables. I farm about 135 acres of organic vegetables, mostly wholesale. Also raise a few pigs and beef cows and laying hens for eggs. Started out, my grandfather had a very small farm where he milked 10 cows by hand, and it has evolved over the years. We're coming from a small roadside stand, and now we're selling the major wholesale markets throughout the Northeast. We're approaching $1 million in sales, total sales. That's gross sales, and it's much more of that if you include the sales of the roadside stand.
How many employees do you have?
We have, seasonally, we have about between 30 and 35, and I have about 4 or 5 that work full-time. The biggest thing that we've seen is the fluctuations in temperature and weather with more extreme conditions. And we don't see it in the springtime variation too much. Our springs haven't changed too much. Like our falls are extended much farther. We're harvesting lettuce much later into the season.
I'm from Jamaica.
Oh, is it pretty cold for you?
Hey, not bad.
Yeah, it's the longer we can keep picking stuff, you know, like something like kale, you might plant it in August or earlier, and then it just continues to keep growing. So every time you go out and harvest it, you know, that's that many more dollars and cases that you get off an acre of land. So I think it's helped us increase our gross sales considerably. Yeah, I think that overall we've seen some, you know, since when I was a kid, you know, more extended dry periods. The droughts last much longer, you know, 6 to 8 weeks or even longer. And while that can be difficult, I've invested in irrigation, and a majority of my fields can be irrigated. And actually, we do better farming organically when I have dry weather, because I have less disease, fewer weeds, fewer insects, and I can control the water with irrigation and provide actually a much better quality product.
Can you tell us about your animals, what you raise?
Yep, we have, right now, I guess I've got as many as 60, 70 pigs. So we're selling, it's not certified organic, but they're all fed organically raised grains, and they're pasture raised. We sell at the roadside stand and to local consumers. And then we have beef, organic beef that we sell at the stand. Probably have 12 or 15 cows that we, it's kind of a side business, but one of the things that I'm trying to focus on more is selling more locally. I think that people are more interested in buying locally, and you know, instead of shipping off tractor trailer loads of kale and collards and lettuce to all points of the Northeast, I'd like to see more of our produce, you know, stay in the local area. And whereas the people of Westminster can't eat all the kale I produce, there is interest in meat, pork or beef, and also hens. I have some laying hens also. I'm worried and scared about our world as a whole. I feel like we're probably in as good a situation as anyone in terms of where we're located. I don't feel like we're ever going to run out of water. The Connecticut River is right next to us, and if that goes dry, then the whole civilization is going to be in pretty big trouble. Personally, I feel like we're okay, but obviously on a global scale, it's very concerning. Things that we're trying to improve on in our growing practices are trying to do strip cropping to reduce soil erosion, to make sure that we don't have nutrients flowing into waterways. Right, I'd like to invest in solar. It uses quite a bit of electricity to run a place like this. The other thing that I'd like to follow up and do more is selling locally. I feel like if I can sell more of what we grow, you know, vegetables, meat, pork, you know, locally, then that's a lot less produce or food that's traveling around the country, you know, using up diesel fuel to be trucked somewhere else. Packaging. We use about $80,000 worth of wax cardboard boxes to ship our produce out of this area, and those are all non-recyclable boxes that go into the landfill somewhere. So some of the local farmers we've gotten together and we've bought plastic containers that we can deliver to local co-ops and local accounts, and they're reusable. That's a huge reduction in the solid waste that we produce. And so the more of that we could sell within a 20-mile radius and not use them in a cardboard box, then, you know, I would think that would be a major step. So that's another thing I'm trying to do, is just try to sell more locally and reduce our carbon footprint that way.
I'm David Major. This is the farm I farm and own together with my wife, Yesenia. It was a sheep farm until about the mid-1940s with merino sheep. It was one of the last farms to have sheep from that era in the 1800s when there were lots of sheep all around. Then it became a dairy farm, and that great big barn in the distance is a barn that was originally for sheep, but the whole downstairs was converted over to a dairy facility. And we farm it's about 300 acres. Milk during the summer, about 200 sheep, make cheese from the milk. Right now on the farm there's about 400 or 450 sheep. In the cheese department we produce a cheese called Vermont Shepherd. That's our really the money maker for the farm. And it's an aged sheep's milk cheese. It's sort of very similar to cheeses that are made in the Pyrenees, both on the French side and on the Spanish side. About 75–80% goes wholesale to stores and restaurants all around the country. Well, I could tell you that we make about 20,000 pounds a year. Gross business is in less than $500,000 a year. Well, I grew up on the farm. We always raised sheep, so that's really the real training. After graduating from Bellows Falls, I went to Harvard and I got a degree in engineering, so that has helped in little bits and pieces on the farm. But then, after trying to make cheese for a few years, going to France in the Pyrenees and spending just 2 weeks, but making cheese at one farm and the next morning making cheese at another farm and so on, that was a big, big learning experience. And by the time I was done, I realized I'd been farming here enough. I realized I really enjoyed farming in Vermont. I realized there was a need for younger, innovative farmers in Vermont. And so I came back here to work.
Do you like farming?
Yeah.
There's definitely been changes in our farming practices over the years have been related to changes in the weather pattern or the climate. Maybe a decade ago and before that, we would count on having to feed hay from about December 10 onward. I should say we do rotational grazing. We graze as much as we possibly can, and we graze hay fields regrowth. So our own fields and other people's fields, we put the sheep on late in the season and into the winter if there's no snow. More recent years, the time at which the snow has come has gotten later and later and later. Last year was the most exceptional, where we're able to graze. I should say when we have to feed hay, it's a lot of hay. It's a lot of sheep, a lot of hay. We have to feed about 35 bales a day. Last year, we didn't have to feed a stitch of hay until early February. So we were able to graze all the way through January, all the way through December, all the way through January, and I don't know whether you remember last January, but it was day after day of maybe a little frost in the morning and sort of misty morning and then beautiful, warm, sunny afternoon. There was one day it got warm enough that I was working in shorts and no shirt last January. Quite a few of the recent years, the sheep have been able to graze into January. Not necessarily, the grass has been growing, although the grass has definitely been growing later and later into the season, but that we've been able to graze hay fields that were cut earlier in the year and raise the regrowth of those. Sure, on a local level, in that particular instance, it's good, but what is really important for farming is that there's some stability in climate. If we know what the weather patterns are going to be, if we know what the climate is going to be, then we know how to farm from year to year. But if the weather this year is a good year for grass, and next year is a good year for grapes, and the year after that is a good year for almonds, we don't know what to do. So what's really important from an agricultural standpoint is that there's stability, and obviously we'd like to have the stability that we've always had. And I don't mean stability as in, of course, not as in stability through the year or that one year isn't different from another, but at this point, as I understand it, our impact, the humans' impact on the environment is still in the process of changing. So we're never going to get any stability if we are still changing the climate on the planet on which we live. So my concern is that I'm unfortunately convinced that there's going to be and is climate change, that there'd be some endpoint to that, and that we work very hard to stabilize our own impact on the environment, not keep on producing more and more greenhouse gases, and that then at that point we will be able to come to some manageable situation agriculturally as well as in all other ways. It does feel to me that I am putting more emphasis on grazing and less emphasis on making hay. We still make a lot of hay, and hopefully it's enough. Well, there are things that we're doing on the farm to try to reduce our impact on the climate. One of them is we use biodiesel in our tractors. We're using some we heat with wood in our house, but also with the oil heat we use biodiesel. Where we cure the cheese, instead of making a walk-in cooler, which has a refrigeration unit to keep it cool, we cure the cheese and essentially have our cooler underground and use the ground's coolness to maintain the cheese at the right temperature.
Did you have to excavate this cave?
We excavated it and then covered it back over. There is the possibility in making biodiesel. A lot of biodiesel these days is made in the Midwest from soybeans and or sunflower seeds or whatever. But there is now the possibility that it can be made, and is being made experimentally, from algae grown on wastewater. And we've have been entertaining the idea of having a greenhouse on the farm that uses the wastewater from our cheese-making operation and grow algae on that. That's an oil-producing algae. There's a biodiesel plant that's being made in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and they could squeeze it and get the oil out of the algae.
We've been here for 49 years. Well, it always has been, to me, important that you take care of yourself. You know, you provide as much as you can for yourself. And it isn't how much an hour you're worth. It's, you know, you're growing your food, you're making your clothes, you're putting things up, you know, basically taking care of yourself, because this is how I came up. And nobody seems to be able to take care of themselves. Wanting to take care of the animals, which is, we start with the cats and the dogs, and then we go out and feed the lamb and the calf.
What is that? Huh?
Then bring the cows in and
Everybody going to be sociable today?
when the cow's milking, I milk the cow, and we feed them. Then we feed the chickens and the turkeys, collect the eggs in the morning, collect the eggs at night. During the day, well, during a summer day, he's usually out getting wood.
Pat mentions about how, you know, she feels good about seeing all the canned goods in the cellar and the jellies. It makes me feel good to see my wood piles, because especially when I look at that barrel of oil approaching $100, you know.
Or working in the garden or something like that.
Yeah, so everything's picked. Yeah, this is a pear tree, and the other tree right straight below it, that's another pear, a Bosque pear. Those are in the cans.
I have food to make and try to do some housework. Yeah, just basically taking care of our eating needs and making the food that we need.
Do you think that taking care of yourself is an answer today?
Oh, definitely. I see it with, you know, people don't make their own things. You look at these young mothers, oh, I don't have time to wash, for instance, baby diapers. Hey, you've got a washer and a dryer. I didn't have a washer and a dryer.
Another thing people could do is to dry their clothes outside, and they smell so nice.
But they can't do this now. They buy and they throw this stuff all away. Yes, I think they've got to get back to it. it's necessary if we're going to keep this planet alive. Is we've just got to slow down and take care of what we got and take care of ourselves. Nobody seems to be able to take care of themselves or be responsible for themselves. So I think in order for the world to survive, we've got to go back to that. We start in the spring with strawberries, and then, all the vegetables. We raise just about everything, beets, carrots.
Asparagus. Usually we have parsnips, so that's the first thing that comes out of the garden in the spring. And then asparagus and radishes early on. But, we buy very, very little in the line of vegetables. We have our own fruit most of the time. If the coons will let us. They got our yellow plums this year. We didn't have that many anyway. We have our own apples, and as to what we don't need, we couldn't begin to eat all the apples that we get. So what surplus we have goes to the cattle. Like to get scratched. The sheep.
Anything surplus goes to the critters.
We buy our beef and pork from a farmer down the road, so we know how the animals have been treated, and we know how the meat has been processed and all of that.
It's all
I've got a very strong feeling about not buying meat that's coming out of some huge slaughterhouse where not only the animals are probably abused, but also the health. So we really believe in eating local, and I think that probably we're eating about as local as you can get.
I unplug the washing machine. Bob unplugs the television so that you don't have that leakage. And the computer the same way. It's pulled out when it's not in use. Anything that doesn't have to be running gets pulled out.
On the orchard, I try to use stuff that's not too toxic, like I don't use Captan or Thoxachlor or stuff like that. I use mostly Rotenone, mix of pyrethrin, maybe copper for a fungicide.
But you look at the changing of the seasons now. You were asking about how we see things change. Bob just brought in the carrots and the cabbages just now. And we were picking, like Paul Harlow, peppers up until recently. The growing season is much later. We used to figure, and I guess I still think in those terms, you didn't plant before Memorial Day because you could easily get a frost up to then. And you usually figured anything after Labor Day was just wonderful. But now, well, it's nothing like going down and looking at those jars full. Yes, it is very satisfying. You can put things in the freezer, but you can't see them. You put them on the shelf and you can see them. I use a pressure canner to do it. You can do it with a water bath, but water bath is not economical as far as fuel is concerned because you've got to get that water up to boiling and you have to keep them going a couple of hours or more.
Canning on a hot day, and it can get pretty warm, but
we just run a fan.
You run a fan and kind of live with it. And at least out here, it usually cools off at night. It's not like living in Brattleboro.
But this is pears and plums, peaches, corn. That's all jelly in there. And over on the other side are the tomatoes and pickles and string beans. I can't reach the red cabbage, I don't think. It's a little, well, maybe I can. No, that's way over. I have to do that. What's the... I don't know. There's the string beans.
Where's your red cabbage?
It's way over there. There's a red cabbage.
That's a red cabbage.
This is tomatoes. And, oh, what's so pretty? Well, this is Golden Glow pickle. And a favorite of the kids and everybody, I don't eat them, are my string bean pickles, dilly beans. Where are my sour pickles? I don't know where I stuck them. Pushed them back because I didn't have that many. I make little sour pickles too, but there I take to my, when I go to a sugar on snow supper, I take my own pickles because they always give us dill pickles, and I don't want dill pickles with sugar on snow. I want real old-fashioned sour mustard pickles. So I take my own.
What's in here now?
Oh, that's a can of chicken.
Chicken.
And then this one here is mincemeat. This is mincemeat made with venison, and this is pork. And those are that's my instant food. Or it's when it's really hot, you can use that too. This is there's 3 kinds of potatoes, but you'll only really be able to see those. We have those are the ones in that bucket are cow horns, which are an old variety. And these are stuff that we have for the cattle. Carrots and small potatoes, sugar beets. But see how our beets grew, our regular beets grew this year? And then those are turnips, gilpetta turnips. We can't really see it, but we've got celery here.
Celery and carrots and beets.
Those are pumpkins and squashes that are going to be for the cattle. I have friends who are lined up to, if Vermont Yankee blows, they're coming to live in my cellar. The food. A whole line of them. The cellar's going to be nice and warm.